afternoon and welcome everyone to Enbridge Line 5, Questions and Answers. I'm Liz Kirkwood, Executive Director of Flow for Love of Water, a Great Lakes Water Law and Policy Center based here in Traverse City, Michigan. I'd like to begin our event by sharing a water and land acknowledgement. For Love of Water is located on lands historically occupied by the Anishinaabe, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands and waters of all Indigenous people and their continued presence. I am truly delighted to present this webinar with our partners at the Oil and Water Don't Mix campaign. Today, you are part of an amazing live audience of nearly 700 people who care deeply about Line 5, the Great Lakes, state and tribal sovereignty, regional energy and water security, and smart solutions on climate change. Backed by popular demand, our webinar today is specifically geared to answer your questions. Our expert panel will be answering questions that participants submitted in advance, as well as questions posed during live this event. Please put your questions into the Zoom Q&A, and we will also be taking questions via Flow's Facebook live feed. And of course, we're going to be trying to answer as many questions as possible. We'll conclude with a series of specific actions that you can take. As always, we are grateful for your time and interest, and we're delighted to be able to bring you this free webinar supported with a generous gift from an anonymous sponsor. Funding from generous donors like you make this programming and webinars like this possible. Now I'd like to introduce our masterful moderator, Skip Pruss, who's Flow's senior legal advisor and an energy expert with decades of experience in both the public and private sector. Welcome, Skip.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Today we are very fortunate to have our panel of experts back. They are Riyaz Kanji, whose firm represents the Bad River Band in the fight against Line 5. Welcome, Riyaz. We also have Christopher Clark, who is the supervising senior attorney of Earthjustice, and Earthjustice represents the Bay Mills Indian community. And then, welcome, Christopher. And then finally, we have Sean McBrearty, who is the campaign coordinator for Oil and Water Don't Mix, and he is also the Michigan director of the Michigan Clean Water Action organization. So we are, as Liz said, we are going to attempt to answer as many questions as we can today in the 40 minutes that we've allotted for this. But before we begin, we just want to, again, set the context and ask Riyaz to give us a brief legal update of where we stand with regard to the litigation in the cases against Line 5.
Thank you, Skip, and I want to thank Flo for hosting this follow-up webinar. There were so many terrific questions that were posed during the last webinar, and I think we all felt badly that we couldn't get to them. So hopefully we will rectify that, at least in part today. I have been asked to do some table setting in terms of where the litigation stands in both the Wisconsin and Michigan sides of the fight, and I'll try to do that as succinctly as possible. On the Bad River side of the ledger, and we talked about this some during the last webinar, we did receive a decision from the federal trial court in Wisconsin in June. I want to state this very clearly because you would not gather this if you were reading any of Enbridge's propaganda about the decision, including the full page ads they've been running in various newspapers as we head into tribal elections at Bad River next week. But the bottom line of the district court's opinion is this: Enbridge is operating a public nuisance in trespass on sovereign tribal lands. And I think all elements of that are critical. The district court found Enbridge to be operating a public nuisance. And what that means is that Enbridge's operations on the Bad River Reservation pose a imminent threat of environmental catastrophe. That was a conclusion of the district court. And secondly, that Enbridge's continued transmission of oil and natural gas liquids through the Bad River Reservation is being done as a continuing trespass that has now at this point gone on for more than a decade. The remedies that the district court offered or ordered for the trespass was to order that the pipeline be shut down within 3 years, June 16, 2026. That is a firm date for the decommissioning of the pipeline under the district court's order. And with respect to the public nuisance, that the pipeline might be shut down far sooner than that. The district court ordered a shutdown plan with triggers for next spring when the flooding season starts again at Bad River. That easily could be triggered. And that's another point I want to highlight for everyone. There is a very real possibility that the pipeline could be shut down as early as next spring, and market participants and others need to responsibly be planning for that. The pipeline, the Bad River is now within 11 feet of exposing and undermining the pipeline. The river has migrated over time. It is now only 11 feet away. And if that sounds like a short distance to you, that's because it is. It's a astonishingly short distance. The band had asked that the pipeline, in fact, be shut down once that distance got within 15 feet. The district court, not willing to shut the pipeline down immediately, has ordered triggers which will essentially call for the line to be shut down once the river is within 5 feet of the pipeline. If we have anything like the erosion we had last spring, that amount of remaining bank could be lost within a week. So I do want to underscore that the situation at the Bad River is a very precarious one, and that with any amount of spring flooding, we do fear that we could be in a situation where Enbridge has to act very quickly and swiftly to shut the pipeline down and purge it of oil, or we could be facing a disaster along the lines of the Kalamazoo River spill with that amount of spill oil released into the Bad River and Lake Superior. So Enbridge appealed the judge's order immediately. We have cross appealed on the remedy issues. We think that 3 years is too long to bless an ongoing trespass on tribal lands. No federal appellate court in the country has ever blessed a trespass of that period of time on tribal lands. And we think that the shutdown order is not sufficiently protective for the reasons I just mentioned, that when we get to the spring, we really are playing with fire at the Bad River, and think that there should be a more immediate shutdown once flooding starts. The Enbridge arguments raised on appeal are ones that have a lot of carryover to the Michigan situation as well. Enbridge's main arguments are that a 1977 pipeline treaty between Canada and the U.S. sort of preempts everything that we're all doing with respect to seeking to enjoin a pipeline that's in trespass, both at Bad River and now at the Straits of Mackinac, and also prevents efforts either by the state of Michigan, the Bad River Band, or others to impose environmental protections, sane environmental protections on the pipeline. It's really a very broad, sweeping argument that they're making about the force of this treaty. They're supported in that by the government of Canada. Enbridge also argues that the Federal Pipeline Safety Act, and this is ironic, preempts these efforts to impose safe operations by the state or by Bad River on its pipeline operations. So those are the issues that will be hashed out now in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal court of appeals that covers Wisconsin, Illinois, and several other states. We are midstream on the briefing. In that the briefing will be wrapped up by early December. the band has received broad-based support and is very appreciative of broad-based amicus support from groups including the state of Michigan, tribes nationwide, businesses, the Great Lakes Business Network, Wisconsin environmental organizations, and also international human rights organizations who have called Canada to task for its abysmal record with respect to the fossil fuel industry and indigenous rights. We expect that there will be oral argument, which will be held in Chicago in the early part of next year, and that the 3-judge panel could well issue a decision by the spring, and we hope by the time of the spring flooding season. On the Michigan side of the ledger, there is movement, and that's the point again I want to underscore, because I think it has been frustrating to many that while there was great momentum developed in Michigan on the political side, which culminated in the Attorney General filing her suits to shut down the pipeline and its operation under the straits, and then the Governor Whitmer's termination decommissioning order. Those took place now several years ago, and then we ended up in some litigation purgatory. The state's actions have got caught up in a jurisdictional quagmire about whether those actions belong in state court or federal court. And Enbridge honestly has been pretty masterful at tying things up. But we are now at a stage where I think that jurisdictional quagmire will be undone. The federal appeals court, which covers Michigan, that's the Sixth Circuit, has before it this question of federal versus state court venue. Briefing in that is also midstream. It will also be completed by early December. If the Sixth Circuit holds oral argument, it will be on an expedited basis. And I think we can be hopeful that the circuit will answer the jurisdictional question by next spring. Still a little ways away, but much closer. And this is really important to underscore. If the circuit holds that the case belongs where it does properly belong in state court, and the case, the state's case gets sent back to state court, it's really teed up to move expeditiously. At that point, the state court judge already had before him totally briefed out motions for resolution on the merits of the state's public trust claim. And there's been also a great deal of factual and expert development that's taken place both there and with respect to the Bad River litigation that will be relevant to what happens in Michigan. So the bottom line here is, I know these legal fights can seem like they take a lot of time, and they do. They take a great deal of time and effort. But I think we, both in Michigan and in Wisconsin, are nearing, very critical decisions that could well be dispositive as to the ultimate fate of the pipeline.
Thank you, Riyaz. We have received a series of questions that go to what happens, or ask what happens if you're ultimately successful and the line shuts down. Does that mean that the refineries currently served by Line 5 are no longer able to get oil, or are there alternatives? And in addition to that, we received a couple of questions this morning asking about propane as well. So what happens if Line 5 shuts down, and are there alternative ways of transporting that oil?
Yes, it's a great set of questions, and obviously critical. Enbridge and the Canadian government have argued vociferously that shutting down the pipeline would essentially lead to economic disaster, the end of civilization as we know it. The amount of rhetoric has been it's been alarmist and expansive over the past few years, and this is one of the values of litigation. The rhetoric has been met with facts, and what's happened in both, especially in the Bad River litigation, since that's been further along. both sides experts had to prepare reports, testify under oath, and some very clear themes emerged from that expert testimony. The one I want to highlight, and I think this is critical to continue to repeat, Enbridge's own economics expert testified in court in Wisconsin that the net effect of shutting down Line 5 would be an increase in the cost of gasoline in Michigan and Wisconsin of 0.5 cent to 1 cent a gallon. Hardly cataclysmic. And in Ontario, a Canadian nickel, again, hardly cataclysmic. That's the price we would collectively have to pay for averting environmental disaster. There has been a very recent report produced by an industry group, professional logistics consultants who are, I will emphasize again, industry people, that does a great job of capturing all the economic information related to a Line 5 shutdown. This was just released this week. I will say, to be fully candid, PLG, the group that put this together, they were experts for the band in the Wisconsin litigation. That's how they first started studying the effects of a Line 5 shutdown. But since that trial concluded, they then continued to work on the issue and have now produced this industry white paper. And I think we're making links available to it. Anyone who's interested in the subject should take a look at this report. There's an executive summary that sort of encapsulates the issues very clearly, and then a fuller report which contains the details. And I will just speak very quickly here to this. But as this slide shows, what PLG has concluded after a great deal of thorough investigation is that almost immediately, if in the face of a Line 5 shutdown, 87% of the crude oil supply could be replaced. And when I say almost immediately, and they talk here about phase 1, that is within 3 months or less of a shutdown. Two things need to happen to replace 87% of the crude oil. There is excess capacity on Enbridge's Line 78, which runs a southern route that avoids the Great Lakes, the sensitive areas of the Great Lakes altogether. There is over 100,000 barrels of excess capacity on that line, which can be filled without any construction, expansion, anything of the sort. And refineries in Quebec, which have long received their crude oil from waterborne sources on the St. Lawrence Seaway, did that until just 6-7 years ago, could go back to doing that very economically. Those two things would take care of the great bulk of the crude oil supply. This graph here shows this very clearly, that in the event of a Line 5 shutdown, between those two things happening, and then just the continued use of other pipelines that supply these refineries, there would be no effect on refinery operations. And that is assuming we want to continue living in a world where we are replicating fossil fuel usage on a one-to-one basis. And I think, of course, I'm sure many of the people on this webinar recognize that is not actually the world we want to continue living in, unless we want to actually burn it down. But even with that as the assumption, it is replacing refinery oil is simply not a challenging task. On the propane side, I know there are a lot of questions about propane. There again are ready-made market mechanisms to replace the propane. And I'll just stress one fact, which I think underscores the ludicrousness of a lot of the Enbridge / Canadian talking points. We here in Michigan and Ontario are within 200 miles of the Marcellus Utica Shale, which over the last 10 years has seen a massive explosion in propane. development. Much of that propane has been exported to Europe, but the Enbridge Canada claim essentially boils down to the notion that the energy markets cannot and will not adapt through the use of other pipelines, rail, etc., to get propane 200 miles to the west instead of shipping it, several thousand miles to Europe. It's a sort of a claim that answers itself. But bottom line, those reports, for anyone interested, contain the most up-to-date and accurate information as to how the markets will adapt, as energy markets always do.
Thank you, Riyaz. Sean, I'm going to move to you. What specifically are the risks associated with the operation and potential failure of Line 5? What are those failure modes? A number of folks would like to better understand that.
Yeah, thank you, Skip. I'm glad to be with you all today. So Riyaz did a great job at going over the risk on the Bad River Reservation to Line 5 that Line 5 poses. So I won't belabor that point further. So, Line 5 is a 640-mile long pipeline. Our biggest concerns here in Michigan revolve around the Straits of Mackinac. But I do want to make the point that this is a 645-mile pipeline that was made to last 50 years maximum, and it's now been pumping oil for 70 years. The risk is all across the pipeline. There are over 400 separate water crossings that Line 5 takes on its route from Superior, Wisconsin to its end in Sarnia, Ontario. Every one of those 400 water crossings endangers a tributary of the Great Lakes. So even though we focus on the unfortunate possibility of major disaster in the Straits of Mackinac, there is danger all across the Line 5 pipeline. Now, to the Straits segment specifically, Line 5 is a 30-inch pipeline overland that breaks into two 20-inch segments that cross the Straits of Mackinac, just west of the Mackinac Bridge. Just in recent years, there's been a 12,000-pound tugboat anchor back in 2018 that put 3 big gashes into Line 5. Now, to fix that, Enbridge put over a kind of a sleeve coating over where those gashes are in the pipeline. One of the problems actually with the sleeve coating that they use to cover these gaps in pipeline is that they're what they call their pigs, which are these things that they'll run through the inside of the pipeline to measure the density of the outer wall of the pipelines, are no longer effective in areas that have this extra sleeve on top of the pipeline. So they had the anchor strikes in 2018. In 2020, ships under contract with Enbridge damaged the pipeline by hooking. We don't know exactly what it was, whether it was an anchor or a cable or something, to one of the anchor points on the pipeline and dragged it out of place. A 15,000-pound anchor was also retrieved near the pipeline. An Enbridge contract ship in, I think, 2021 actually ran into the Mackinac Bridge. Watching, the number one rule of boating in the Straits of Mackinac is don't hit the bridge. It's pretty easy to do. Watching Enbridge operate in the Straits of Mackinac is like watching the Keystone Cops, except it's not funny, it's horribly damaging. Now, other concerns relate to the decay and failure of Line 5. So Line 5 was originally designed back in 1953 in the Straits of Mackinac to be attached to the bottomlands of the Straits of Mackinac with sandbags that would keep the pipeline essentially on the bottomlands. They revised that design and went to these screw anchors years later. And now the screw anchors anchor the pipeline into the bottomlands of the lake and then have these steel sleeves that go around the circumference of the pipeline that are attached to the anchors. These anchor points were never designed to go with the pipeline. There was never an engineering study done to show that these supports would properly work with Line 5. And there's actually a good chance we can see where they've put these anchor points. And a lot of them are in places where there are new bends in the pipeline. So there is a chance that these anchor supports they're using in the Straits of Mackinac are causing new bends in Line 5, which of course is a very dangerous scenario for a pipeline that might rupture. There's, again, this is a 70-year-old pipeline that was made to last 50 years. So there are also concerns with vortex-induced vibrations, which is one of the more common ways for a pipeline to fail. There's also concerns with the original coating of the pipeline. Originally, there were supposed to be 3 coats of protection, if you will, between the oil in the pipeline and the water in the Straits of Mackinac. There's the steel of the pipeline itself, followed by a coal tar enamel coating and an exterior coating. In several locations on Line 5, both of those exterior layers of coating have worn away, leaving the exposed steel of the pipeline to corrosion from the Straits of Mackinac. So those are some of the major issues that we see with this pipeline. And, we also know that the quickest Enbridge would be able to shut down Line 5 was it roughly 18 to 20 minutes to actually shut down the pipeline. That's the quickest. And, a pipeline running nearly 1 million gallons an hour, even if they were able to shut down as quickly as possible, we're talking about a huge oil spill risk. And, there are other risks to this as well, but I think we'll, leave it there for now. Enbridge can't be trusted to operate this pipeline. They have a history of neglect when it comes to the pipelines they operate in Michigan and across the country. And, that history of neglect, of course, includes the Line 6B oil spill in Kalamazoo, which we remember very well here in Michigan. So, on top of all those other physical risks, there's also the fact that this is a company with a history of bad actions and of trying to hide their actions. And it's a company that can't be trusted to operate pipelines anywhere, but especially in the worst spot of the Great Lakes for an oil spill.
Thank you, Sean. Just quickly, lest there be any doubt of Enbridge's awareness of the risk associated with an anchor strike, they actually sued the tug company that struck the pipelines in 2018. And in that complaint, Enbridge alleged, and I quote, "A reasonable vessel operator would be cognizant of the potential for severe harm to the Great Lakes should any of the pipelines and cables in the Straits of Mackinac be struck by an anchor." Sean, I'm going to stick with you. There's questions about monitoring systems. Enbridge does have a monitoring system in place to ostensibly reduce the chance of an anchor strike. What is that system, and what is your thoughts about its effectiveness?
Well, so yeah, Enbridge has cameras positioned around the straits where they attempt to look at vessels going by and make sure that their anchors are not down. Now, there are many problems with this. Night is one problem. Fog is another problem. Weather conditions on the straits are unpredictable, subject to change at a moment's notice. And, there's also, on top of that, the human error factor, which, again, we've seen a history and a pattern of problems with human error at Enbridge when it comes to safety. On top of those issues, that there's simply monitoring vessel traffic you could make the argument it marginally guards against one of the possible risks to line 5. It does nothing for all of the other risks that we've discussed on the pipeline. So, this monitoring system, I think, is a nice PR trick that Enbridge is using that really doesn't do much at all to make this pipeline safer. There's also the fact that in the case in maritime emergencies do happen. And, if, for instance, a large tanker is losing its ability or is having trouble with their ability to steer or navigate, there's a decent chance somebody's going to drop an anchor as they approach the Mackinac Bridge, especially if sight lines are not clear and it's foggy, or dark, things like that. So, accidents do happen. No amount of just monitoring vessels to make sure that their anchors are raised adds significant protection for line 5.
Yeah, there is a maritime regulation that prohibits anchoring in the straits because of the risk to the pipelines, but that regulation has an exception for emergencies, and a ship's captain will always act first to protect the vessel and crew. Thank you, Sean. We've also been asked about the underwater currents. There's been several questions about that. I'll just take a quick shot. We know from research that has been done by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and others in the University of Michigan that the currents move back and forth across the straits. It's highly unusual. They can do that on a daily basis. The currents also oscillate up and down. The dispersion modeling that has been done by the University of Michigan indicates that if in the event of a large pipeline failure, more than 700 miles of shoreline, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron shorelines could be impacted by oil. More than 27,000 square miles would be impacted by the oil as it spread. The currents at the bottom of the lake are pretty forceful. In 1953, the engineering studies indicated that if the currents exceeded 1.96 miles per hour, the pipeline could bend or would bend. There is evidence that the current strength at the bottomlands where the pipelines are located are greater than 2 miles per hour, may even approach 4 miles per hour, which is considerable. And most importantly, the concern is the pervasive and continuous scour and erosion underneath the pipelines. It's the scour and erosion that has caused the installation of more than 200 of these saddle anchor systems that you described, Sean. And that it continues. And one of the big fears is that the erosion might be so severe in one or more of those places that those anchors may swing freely and no longer be anchored to the bottom and add to the force that the pipelines already experience from the strong currents in the strait. With that, Christopher, we're going to finally move to you. Can you speak to the physical, cultural, and spiritual significance of the waters of the Great Lakes? And also to, if you would, the archaeological finds that have been found in the Strait of Michigan.
Yes, thank you, Skip.
Excuse me.
Thank you, and I want to thank my good friends at Flow for having me today. It's an honor to be here. For those of you who don't know, I'm an attorney with the national group Earthjustice, and along with colleagues from the Native American Rights Fund, we represent the Bay Mills Indian community and its advocacy surrounding the issues that we're talking about today. And that is also a great honor to represent Bay Mills. And I wanted to just share with folks, I think this is something that many know, but in case you don't, that the Straits of Mackinac and the surrounding land and water have very deep cultural, spiritual, historic, and economic significance to Bay Mills, other tribal nations, and indigenous communities in the area. And in fact, this area is regarded as the center of creation for Anishinaabe people. And it's for this reason that Bay Mills is in this fight. The area in and around the Straits contains a remarkable concentration of cultural sites and resources. These include burial sites, they include archaeological remains that reflect literally a record of thousands of years of tribal history. So and the waters of the straits are part of the tribal fishery. And the fishery is critically important to Bay Mills and other tribes in the area. I will share with you that commercial fishing contributes to over half of Bay Mills household income. So over half of the households rely upon commercial fishing for all or part of their income. So what we're talking about today, the possibility of environmental catastrophe in the Straits, really poses a dire threat to both the economic well-being of the members of the tribe and to their spiritual and cultural traditions. The importance of this really can't be overstated. My client, President Whitney Gravel of the Bay Mills Indian community, when she is asked to talk about the possibility of a oil spill in the Straits, she describes it sometimes as a heart attack. And I think she uses that phrase because the Straits themselves represent the heart of many of the tribe's cultural traditions and their way of life. And so for this reason, we have been actively involved in the fight here on behalf of Bay Mills. We have been supporting some of the litigation efforts that Riyaz described at the beginning of the call, and we've been actively involved in working with the various agencies who are reviewing the proposed tunnel that Enbridge wants to put beneath the Straits of Mackinac.
Thank you, Christopher. Sean, back to you. Who will pay for the cleanup and new drinking water sources when Line 5 fails?
Yeah, that's a great question with an unfortunate, troubling answer. So Enbridge, the way they're structured as a corporation, Enbridge Inc. has I think over 200 different subsidiaries. 2 of their subsidiaries own Line 5. The way the corporation is structured, liability remains with the subsidiaries, even though profits flow up to Enbridge Inc. So essentially what this means is that the subsidiaries would be on the hook to pay for the cleanup of a Line 5 spill. However, in 2019, the Michigan Attorney General's office released a report. Oh, and so I should say as well, the subsidiaries are required to have financial assurance in the form of liquid assets totaling $1.878 billion, which is frankly a lowball prediction for how much an oil spill would cost. In fact, Flo did an excellent study years ago with Michigan State University that pegged the damage from a Line 5 spill at closer to, I believe it was $5 billion, with economic damages going far beyond that. Now, they're required to have $1.878 billion in liquid assets as financial assurance against a spill. But according to the Attorney General's 2019 study, the subsidiaries combined did not have even that $1.878 billion in liquid assets. And, unfortunately, one of the possibilities here is that if Line 5 were to spill, the people who would be on the hook are the Michigan taxpayers, because when these subsidiaries go bankrupt, it's going to be left to the state, to the federal government to take care of this oil spill and to the extent they can clean up the Great Lakes. But on top of that, no amount of money can actually clean the Great Lakes from a major oil spill. The best the oil industry has ever done at cleaning up an open water spill is getting around 20% of the product that was spilled. So, even a successful cleanup will not address the problem. And, eventually there's no way to buy more clean water. I think, that we all know that. And that's why I think a lot of people are here and care so deeply about this issue. We're in the age of a climate crisis where the Western United States, we're seeing increased droughts all the time. And here we are sitting with 20% of the world's fresh surface water, and we're keeping it at risk for an oil company's profits.
So I just want to add, in a legal proceeding in Minnesota, Enbridge's chief financial officer testified under questioning that Enbridge Inc., the Canadian parent, would not be financially responsible for accident admissions of its subsidiaries. So, that underscores the fact that we don't have liability protection for a pipeline spill. Christopher, back to you. How is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' recent announcement that they will not consider the entirety of Line 5, that's 640 miles that Sean referenced, in their environmental impact statement review process?
Thank you, Skip. So the Army Corps is conducting a environmental impact statement review process with respect to Enbridge's proposal to construct a tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac. And on behalf of Bay Mills, we have argued that the scope of the Army Corps' review should include the direct, indirect, and the cumulative impacts of this project in an area beyond simply the proposed 4-mile crossing at the Straits. And as you mentioned so far, we've not been successful in persuading them to take a more expansive view. Instead, they are looking at really the 4-mile segment that's crossing on the Straits. We're going to continue to be advocating that position. There will be, once the Army Corps issues its draft environmental impact statement, there will be an opportunity for public comment on that, and we do encourage people to engage at that point on the Army Corps' review. But the reasons why a more robust review and more expansive review from a geographic perspective is necessary has been mentioned by some of the other comments here today, is that this project impacts the operation of the entire line. So if you construct a tunnel, the purpose of the tunnel is to perpetuate the operation of this line for years to come, and that has implications across the pipeline's entire length. As Sean mentioned earlier, there are many waterways that this pipeline crosses. So if you perpetuate the continued operation of the pipeline, you are keeping in place the risk that this pipeline presents all across its length. And again, as said earlier, this is a aging and deteriorating pipeline that has leaked and spilled across its entire length. And as we saw with the Line 6B spill, a inland spill can be devastating. It can enter waterways and cause terrible catastrophe throughout the area. So we are encouraging and will be continuing to advocate that the Army Corps take a more expansive look at this proposed project.
Thank you, Christopher. We have received a couple of questions during this webinar, and also we've had some others on this subject. Riyaz, back to you. Is Canada cooperating with the United States to close Line 5? If not, what can be done to get the help needed from Canada?
Thank you, Skip. I think the answer is an unambiguous no. Canada is not cooperating with respect to shutting down the pipeline. I will say this as somebody who grew up in Canada and was a very proud Canadian and very fond of my Canadian childhood. I have been so utterly disappointed by the government of Canada and its approach to the Line 5 issue. Canada has played the heavy here. It's played the bully, really, in terms of doing everything it can to impose pressure on the Biden administration and on the courts to keep the line open. And it has done so in really an open violation of tribal rights and state rights. Canada's very early on invoked the 1977 treaty that I mentioned with respect to Michigan's actions to shut down the line. It has now been very active in the Bad River case. We know that in our case, in the Bad River case, its actions had an effect on the trial court judge, who became very skittish about ordering the shutdown of the pipeline because of the claims being made by Canada about the effects of shutting down the line. We also know that Canada has made it a diplomatic matter of the first order. Prime Minister Trudeau has directly and consistently raised Line 5 with President Biden and with the State Department in Canada's efforts to keep the line open. I don't know the answer to the question about what we can do in Canada. We have good allies, environmental groups in the First Nations, but we really need the Canadian people more generally to speak up with their government about the fact that Canada is taking a position which so openly continues to advance fossil fuel usage in contravention of Canada's own obligations, and which countenances the continued violation of Indigenous rights.
So I will add that apparently there is a Canadian minister who has a petition that he is urging Canadian residents to sign regarding the shutdown of Line 5. And we will post a link to that petition for people who are listening to this webinar. Christopher.
Skip there. If I say one more quick thing, there's a great question I saw about which treaty is older, this 1977 pipeline treaty or the treaties between the tribes and the United States. A fantastic question. The treaties with the tribes date back to the 1840s and 1850s, and under clear law, they predominate. The clear law is that unless a subsequent treaty was clearly intended by Congress to override or abrogate tribal rights, it does not do so. And there was no indication that Congress ever intended to upend the rights that Christopher talked about for the Michigan tribes, or that the Bad River Band has. And here's the other critical thing about that 1977 pipeline treaty. It has an Article 4, which expressly allows American governments, be they states, tribes, the federal government, to take actions with respect to a pipeline to support environmental protection. It's the clear letter of the treaty. That's what Michigan has acted pursuant to. That's what the Bad River has acted pursuant to. In Canada and Enbridge, in their briefing, they just ignore that article. They never address it because it so directly contradicts their arguments under the treaty.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that elaboration. Christopher, why not? This is a question recently received. Why not support Enbridge's building of the tunnel at the same time you litigate the shutdown of Line 5? If litigation is unsuccessful, at least we would have the tunnel as a much better and safer alternative than the current pipeline.
The answer is that the tunnel is not a solution to the problems that we're talking about today for a variety of reasons. And I will share with the audience that we've been representing the Bay Mills Indian community in a proceeding before the Michigan Public Service Commission, who's evaluating the proposed tunnel. And in that proceeding, we presented the testimony of a pipeline safety expert and a tunneling expert, two different experts, both of whom flagged significant engineering and safety concerns with the proposed design of the tunnel. Because of the way this tunnel is designed, they have significant concerns that the pipeline could leak within the confines of that tunnel, and that when you have crude oil and especially natural gas liquids leaking inside an enclosed space like that, it creates a highly flammable and explosive environment. So you are potentially creating a tunnel in which there could be a leak or spill from the pipeline. And to Sean's point earlier, the way this pipeline operates and takes a while to shut down, if you do have a leak, an enormous amount of fuel and product then ends up in this enclosed space. Vapors are created that are highly, highly flammable. And an explosive event in that tunnel runs the risk of creating a very high temperature fire that causes the concrete of the tunnel to fail, which then exposes the underlying steel structure to a collapse or meltdown. So there is, what you're basically doing with this design is trading one set of risks for another. The other thing I just want to highlight about the engineering design of this has never been done before in the world. There is no other tunnel like this in which a liquids pipeline is running through a tunnel underneath water like this. So this is an untested design. The second reason why we cannot support this tunnel is that, as mentioned earlier, it is absolutely imperative that we begin to transition to clean energy sources. This is not the time for us to be gambling on new fossil fuel infrastructure. We should be transitioning to clean energy sources. Third, the tunnel does not address the risk presented by Line 5 all along its entire length. As mentioned earlier, there are problems all along the length of this tunnel. So even if, which it's not, the tunnel is a solution to a problem in the Straits, it doesn't correct the threats posed on the Bad River Reservation. It doesn't correct the threats posed along the entire length of the pipeline. And then lastly, and we've made this argument to the Michigan Public Service Commission, kind of hearkening back to the comments made earlier, it is not reasonable or fair to construct a tunnel through an area that has such significant cultural, spiritual, and historic significance to Indigenous people. Too often, environmental catastrophes and environmental risks are borne by Indigenous communities and tribal nations. And so for that reason, Bay Mills is not in support of this tunnel, is actively encouraging the Michigan Public Service Commission and the Army Corps of Engineers and the other agencies that are looking at this to deny Enbridge's applications to construct this project.
Thank you. It should also be pointed out that whether or not Enbridge is serious about actually constructing the tunnel appears to be an open issue. Enbridge in 2021 petitioned the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to allow it to, its term, quote, truncate, unquote, the depreciation schedules for all of its pipeline assets. And the reason given to FERC that Enbridge needed to do this is that the decarbonization and climate change efforts by the United States and Canada may reduce the need for pipelines to transport oil long term. And so they wanted to depreciate their pipeline system in a much shorter time frame, which is really interesting. We just received an observation and a question really from a viewer who points out that the Enbridge parent board has not approved the tunnel and its financing. So what might be the significance of that? Well,
I'll say one thing about that, Skip, and I think that Ian Bunn's observation is exactly on point, which is Enbridge they're masterful at proposing ideas where the real intent is to continue with the status quo. So the proposal of the tunnel without a commitment from the board of directors, without any real up-to-date cost estimates, it was the way that they convinced the Snyder administration to allow the existing pipelines to remain in operation. And under what has to be one of the worst deals ever struck in history, the deal is they get to continue the existing pipeline until they build the tunnel. No timeline, no finite end on the tunnel operation. So it's a way of shifting attention. Same thing at Bad River, where a reroute has been proposed, and Enbridge's idea is we get to continue operating the pipeline on the reservation until whenever it is we complete the reroute. So it's a smart tactic, but it's one that just has the effect of allowing the threat posed by existing pipeline operations to continue in perpetuity.
there is so much focus on the tunnel. I just want to put this question to Sean because I know he's looked at this. The geotechnical work in preparation to actually build the tunnel there's been many questions raised about that. Can you just quickly summarize the concerns, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. So the industry standard for geotechnical investigation before you build a tunnel is the industry standard is to essentially do these boreholes so that you can take samples and figure out what kind of rock you're going to be drilling through. To do these boreholes every 50 feet every 50 to 100 feet when we're looking at complex geology, which the Straits of Mackinac is notoriously complex geology. Now, Enbridge only drilled holes every 950 feet. So they did roughly 1/10 of the industry standard recommended research. Now, in that 1/10 of the research that they did, they found that roughly half of the boreholes revealed geology that was poor to very poor for drilling material. And it also showed that they're not essentially going to be drilling through bedrock. They're going to be drilling through different materials, a lot of it having the porosity more similar to sand than rock, which means way greater water infiltration into the tunnel than Enbridge was anticipated.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. I think maybe you, Riyaz, why would Michigan allow it? Why couldn't Canada run the pipeline through its own territory?
They can. I mean, you could build a pipeline around the northern part of the lakes and across Ontario. It's a longer route, which is why I think it wasn't built that way in the first place. But the bottom line is Canada doesn't want to shoulder the environmental burdens of the oil transmission. And I think that's one thing that I think many people understand. But Canada's in a complete free rider situation here, where it derives the greatest amount of benefit from the vast majority of the oil and natural gas liquids end up in Canada and are used in Canada, and it shoulders none of the environmental burdens. Though as an audience member did rightly point out, of course, a catastrophe in the Great Lakes will affect Canada, and it's one of the things that has been so shocking is that people on the Canadian side of the border are not focused in the way they should be on the threat posed to Lake Superior or Lake Huron by the Line 5 spill. But the Canadian government, absolutely not focused, wants the benefits without any of the burdens.
Pointed out by a viewer. This viewer says 60 to 70% of Line 5 oil is used to make chemicals such as resins in Sarnia, Ontario. Actually, what percentage of Line 5 content is actually used in North America at all? Excuse me, it says North America, but used in the United States.
Yeah, and again, the answer in terms of the United States is a small amount. The vast majority of the oil is used in Ontario and Quebec. The vast majority of the natural gas liquids that's absolutely right, are processed in Sarnia as part of the petrochemical complex there. A small amount of propane is used for heating in Upper Michigan and Wisconsin, and Enbridge sort of very masterfully took that and said, well, look, if you shut down Line 5, you're going to freeze people out of their homes. It's absolutely not correct. That PLG report evidences that with very small investments, and the government of Michigan has studied this very closely, very small investments, you can easily supply the propane that's required for heating homes. There's a question from an environmental graduate student about what work people can be doing. I think one really interesting project would be to trace exactly how the oil and natural gas liquids are used in Ontario, and a lot of it is for chemical purposes that have had the effect of polluting our waterways. The water pollution that comes out of Sarnia has destroyed tribal communities downriver from that, destroyed ways of life. And so this notion that the products are necessary for the advancement of civilization is one that I think is particularly offensive.
So now we're getting towards the end of our question period, but we have a whole series of questions that we received from the last webinar, during preparing for this one, and during this webinar, and they go to, what can people do? Who has the most power to keep attention on the issue? What can the public do about it now? How can we effectively spread the word? So we're going to turn this back over to Liz and Sean to steer people and to inform them as to the steps that they might actually take in furtherance of shutting down Line 5.
Thanks, Skip, and a huge thanks to Riyaz, Christopher, Sean, and all of you for just continuing to engage and answer these questions. So here's the part that you've all been waiting for. What can you do? We're going to be, first off, putting a link to all of these actions in the Q&A right now. We also are going to share this information with you in a post webinar email. So if you're not, and so we've got 10 ways for you to take action. And the first one, of course, is going to be to email your state and or federal lawmakers to shut down Line 5, elevating the PLG report that Riyaz mentioned. And you can just go to forloveofwater.org/toolkit, and then you will be able to click onto that. So Sean, I'm going to turn over the next action to you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So the next action we have is resharing Line 5 social media posts. This is, an easy thing that people can do that really does make a difference in getting this issue out there in front of more people, especially as we lean on President Biden and his administration to take action. So, Oil and Water Don't Mix, Flow, Clean Water Action, Sierra Club, all the different organizations that are working together on this, National Wildlife Federation, there's tons of organizations working on this. Follow them, share posts that they make. There's also lawmakers who are already concerned and working on this. Recently, Representative Ro Khanna from California posted a great thread about Line 5 on Twitter, asking President Biden to take action. Sharing things like that can be very important to getting the word out about this issue. And, the next one, our third one here, is signing the Oil and Water Don't Mix petition to President Biden, which is an action that we have set up, calling on President Biden to revoke the presidential permit for Line 5 and use his authority as president to enforce Governor Whitmer's revocation of Enbridge's easement to operate in the Straits, and enforce, correct and right the wrong of Enbridge trespassing on tribal territory. President Biden has all the authority that he needs to revoke that presidential permit. So please sign our petition asking him to do so. Liz?
Thanks. So our fourth one is directed to our friends in Canada. As Riyaz and everyone else has emphasized, Canadian engagement on this issue is vital. And I wanted to mention that 25% of Canadians take their drinking water from the Great Lakes. There's so much at stake here. And so we have a petition that the Environmental Defense has put together. And this is directed at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and many of the ministers within the Canadian federal government. Back to you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. The last one on this slide, and this is a really crucial one I'd love for everybody to do. If you go to oilandwaterdon'tmix.org/volunteer and sign up to volunteer, we now have organizers in Michigan who are going to be leading volunteer teams in different areas all around the state. And we need everybody who's interested in this issue and wants to see change to sign up to volunteer so that we can use that. If you're not in Michigan, you can still sign up to volunteer. There's going to be other options and other things you can do remotely from wherever you are in Michigan, in the United States, in Canada, overseas. Please do sign up to volunteer. It's absolutely critical that we get as many volunteers as we can on board as we go into this push to build this into a national campaign and force the hand of the president. Back to you, Liz.
Thanks, Sean. Our next action is a challenge, share 5 for line 5. So we would ask you to share our fact sheet about line 5, oil and water don't mixes fact sheets and others. And again, the PLG report. We think this is a really critical piece to show our political leaders throughout the region, at the federal level, in both countries, that we can make this transition and we can shut down line 5 in a planned and orderly fashion. You heard it from Riyaz, 87% of the oil could immediately be switched within the existing system. We also know that we can't build additional fossil fuel infrastructure in this century to meet our net zero goals by 2050, according to the International Energy Agency. So please click on that and share and find 5 people. Thanksgiving is coming up over the holidays, and these are opportunities to engage people in conversation. Back to you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz. So another one, writing a letter to the editor of your local paper. And Flow has an excellent toolkit available on their website for writing letters to the editor. And if you need support, you can get in touch with the folks at Flow or the folks at Oil and Water Don't Mix. We're happy to help support your efforts in getting a letter to the editor in your local paper. It's also very good to do this when you see an article in your local paper about line 5, especially one that might not, have all of the points that we're raising and might include a little bit more of the Enbridge perspective, which we're, seeing in a lot of the media. Back to you, Liz.
Thanks, Sean. This is a really fun one for young folks, especially, I think, because, we're always trying to get out there and use social media to engage folks. So this is an opportunity to share your photo and be part of a larger line 5 photo petition. And the Sierra Club has put this together. And if you click onto that link, you'll find an online portal where you can make the submissions. If you have any trouble, please reach out to us and we'll help troubleshoot any problems you have. But we're looking for you to show your solidarity, and this is another great way to engage. Okay, back to you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. And then also, so there've been, there's a great 30-minute special on WDIV Local 4 in Detroit on line 5 that aired recently. If you go to clickondetroit.com, you can find that. And I think it's very good to watch that and share it, as well as, we are actually working, date to be determined, but to schedule a screening and a panel of the Local 4 Detroit story. And also just want to put a plug in here as far as watching different things on this. There's a great film called Troubled Waters, which is a longer documentary on line 5 that premiered up in Traverse City just a month or so ago. And they're looking at doing showings in other places around Michigan. Again, date and time are to be determined. But stay tuned for that. It's another great thing you can watch. Invite your friends to join you. Inviting friends to come do things with you, people who may not know about line 5, is what we call relational organizing. It's a really, really important skill in studies about people's voting tendencies. If the best messengers, people they trust the most, are people in their social circle, asking them to get involved. So please, please do that. That's a hugely important thing. Liz.
Sean, thank you for mentioning there are so many amazing films about line 5, like Troubled Waters. This was just the most recent documentary that's been shared. And we'll be adding additional resources. Barton Bund has done a series of pieces in the past, and there are many others. As we grow this toolkit, we will be adding those additional resources. And so finally, for number 10, we just would ask you to share this page, which is forloveofwater.org/toolkit. We would welcome your suggestions about other resources. This is how we continue to grow public engagement. So looking at the time, I'm going to wrap things up. We're coming to a close, and I just want to personally thank each and every one of you for attending and sharing and asking just amazing questions. I also want to give a special thanks to our brilliant panelists and moderator for sharing their experiences and deep knowledge on this matter that continues to inspire us to work together for the future of the Great Lakes. Thank you to our anonymous donor who made this webinar possible. And as I mentioned, we're going to follow up later this week with links to the recording of the webinar, related resources, and Line 5 actions that you can take and share. We do have a final favor to ask. We just, for you to please fill out a brief survey that we're going to drop in the chat window and we'll send by email. Please know that your responses help us develop future webinars, programming, and other public engagement opportunities. And finally, I want to leave you with this thought that, you know, our movement to shut down Line 5 is growing stronger because of you and your commitment to take action and to spread the word. We've had nearly another 700 people register for this webinar, and countless others will watch it on demand over the next weeks and months. And while Line 5 is winding its way through the court system, it's more important than ever before for you to voice your opinion in a show of solidarity with the state of Michigan and the tribes to protect our rights to water. Continue to educate your friends, families, and neighbors, because the will of the people will influence the future of Line 5. Collectively, our voices matter in this fight to protect the Great Lakes, and I hope you come away from today's event feeling more knowledgeable, empowered, and motivated for change. Thank you for attending, taking action to protect the Great Lakes, and we hope to see you again soon.